It's Thursday. It's 6 o'clock. This is Men's Radio Station. That can only mean one thing. It is time for the ABC of CBD. You know, I'm not patting myself on the back in the least. I'm so proud of this show, and I'm so proud of Ollie Mammon, who brought the whole thing to us. And I thought, well, let's give it a go. And now we're up for awards in America. People seem to be absolutely loving it. And it's been a wild rocket ride of a journey. I came into this knowing the square root of nothing. And now 33 weeks later, 33 weeks later, I'm hardly an expert, but I feel so much more empowered to have a proper conversation. By the way, Mr. Ollie Mammon, yesterday, what's today? Thursday? Yeah. Yesterday, live from Mexico, we had Callie Blackwell as our special guest.
I heard she was incredible, right?
She blew our audience away. I was so impressed, as I am with all your guests, because I don't do any of the bookings. It's all down to Ollie. I take no credit for it whatsoever. And I was so thrilled. I thought, I've got to introduce Callie and her extraordinary story to the rest of our listeners and viewers all over the world. They went wild for her.
To be honest with you, I just like the fact that I'm influencing the station. I'm influencing the station to take the guests and show their stories off to more people. We only have a certain audience, and in fact, the matter is some of the people
that's why
who
I wanted
come
to
on.
wind it. Yeah, that was exactly my point. I wanted to widen it out, and I wouldn't do it with all your guests because it's too niche. But with Callie's story, which was and not just that. I haven't even told you this, Ollie. Callie Blackwell is going to be the special guest on our book program on Women's Radio Station, and with the great Hazel Butterworth, and I'm just delighted.
I can't wait for Callie to have her own radio show on the Women's Radio Station. I reckon it's going to happen. You know, girls got something. So I mean,
she has.
Callie's just dropped her new brand. So it's called The Activist.
She was talking about it. We spoke about it.
I mean, if anyone loves Callie, by all means.
But I felt traitorous because it wasn't the Tincture Club.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I still love Callie, and she deserves her props. You know, when someone does something right, they deserve their kudos for it.
Very interesting person. And Veronica Curran, good evening to you. Now, Ollie, I think it is time for a word from our sponsors.
Hell yeah. I'm sure you've heard before that good quality CBD needs to be really, really expensive. This is the new view of CBD, a product created by users for users, a product at an affordable price, available everywhere, at any time, at the simple click of a button. Just CBD and MCT oil. No additives, no preservatives, and no flavor enhancers. It's a simple subscription-based service. The cleanest possible CBD delivered to your door for the lowest possible price. Your product, your rights for the lowest possible price.
Have you changed that? Am I going
Not that I know of. Maybe.
You know, I wasn't around the bit. I swear to God, I think I'm entering a parallel universe sometimes.
I zoned out for a second. I do that quite a lot.
You have no idea what's going on. Now, anyway, that's enough from me. As ever, we've got not one, but two guests this evening.
It's the first time we've
remaking
ever
Lawrence of Arabia. That's how many people are in the cast. Ollie, over to you, fella.
Fine. So first of all, thank you for everyone who's joined us for the last 33 weeks. Thank you for everyone who supported us. Thank you for all of our listeners. Thank you to all of our guests. Today, we're actually joined by two guests who have come on previously. So we have Phil Monk, who was here last week, and we have our favorite cannabis lawyer, Mr. Robert Jappy, who was actually here, I think, around episode 8 or episode 9. So, they've both come on together now. Phil Monk and Robert Jappy are actually doing some work together alongside the WTU. Last week, we had an insight into Phil's life and into Phil's journey and what Phil does for the world of cannabis users out there. Now, the good thing about Phil is he's very outspoken, very knowledgeable. He has this fantastic brain on his shoulders, a little bit opinionated, but to be honest with you, who isn't in today's world? And like, he came on last week and he really did blow us away with his stories of, the story of his life and like why he's ended up in the position he's in and why he fights for other people out there who are in the same sort of position as him. So this week we're joined by, like I said, Robert Jappy and Phil Monk to discuss what they're doing in the WTU together. Phil discussed how he suffers for many years with congenital bone issues, and he's been a medical cannabis user for so long, and he fights for people's rights to medicate, and he sees modern medicine as more destructive than good. Now, we get that, but there's how do you convince the world and how do you convince the general population of the planet to kind of back you and back your journey so that, you know, they become supporters. You know, you create a bigger organization with a stronger message, and you create something which people can follow. And I really do believe that, you know, since Robert and Phil came together, they've created something which people can really get behind and follow. Now, I know that, you know, like Robert will say that, you know, the WTU is all Phil. But there is definitely something which Robert adds. And, you know, that's what I really want to get to the bottom of today. Today is actually going to be less of a set episode. Most of the time I create lists of questions and I try and like navigate the conversation to where I want it to go. This week is going to be a bit more, you could call it free conversation, because I just want to kind of get to the bottom of why, how, where, and when they got together and what it is they're trying to accomplish. And that's really the aim for today.
And every week, Ollie, we get to about 50 minutes into the show and you go, I've only asked 4 questions. I've got another 72. And you look down at you prepare.
I have ADHD.
Nobody else. It's really interesting.
Russ, I have ADHD. If I don't prepare, I don't know what's going to happen. So today it's an experiment because I don't know what's going to happen. I know it's like, please God, fingers crossed, I don't just lose track of the whole episode.
I heard rumors Phil might just do show tunes.
That could be fun. Apparently he's got an incredible voice. Incredible
we could
singer.
do perhaps the last 3 scenes of Les Mis. Anyway, I don't know. We'll move on.
Anyway, look, let's bring on the guest. Let's start this conversation. And, you know, thank you both for joining us. Where's Phil? There we go. Just thought, he left. He hasn't come. He's
Afternoon,
left.
gents. Thank you for having me back on the show.
Yes,
Hi,
Phil and Rob.
Thank you both. It's very, very nice to see you again, Phil. It feels like only a week. And Robert, I know it's been a lot longer, but thank you very much for being brave enough and finding the time to come back onto Men's Radio Station and the ABC of CBD. Both of you, very welcome and really appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Before we dive into everything, you know, it's been a little bit longer since we've seen Robert, so I'm just going to ask him like a 1 or 2 questions just to be like, you know, what have you been up to since the last time we've seen you? What have you seen? Have you noticed any changes in the marketplace? Has anything cool happened that you want to bring up? But before we move into the conversation of you both, you know, you're here, might as well ask you. It's been a while. What you been up to, man?
Well, I mean, it's been a crazy time with novel foods. I'm sure you know better than anyone, Ollie. The novel food deadline was at the end of March, and it's been trying times for all CBD companies who have tried hard to be compliant and hope to be compliant and want to continue building their businesses. So that's been taking up most of my time, I would say. Fair
play. And successful?
Well, I made, you know what, I looked at this early on and I thought, when the FSA made their announcement about the novel food regime, I thought, okay, this is a good opportunity to manage some novel food submissions for my clients. And then as I looked into it deeper, I thought this is a very, very bad idea. Novel food is not a legal submission. It is not something for lawyers to be messing around with. It is a highly technical, scientific submission. So I made a decision very early on not to get involved. So I haven't been managing anyone's novel food submissions. And I can tell you,
don't blame you.
The best decision I ever made. I've been sleeping very well at night, and I'm so delighted.
Robert, can I put you slightly on the spot for those who don't follow the show every week?
This is what happens when I don't write questions.
Oh
this
God,
is what
I really
when I
wish
don't
you'd
write
written your script this week.
Exactly. This is what happens when I don't write a script.
Just write a shopping list. You'll feel better. I'd never heard. I'll be honest with you. When this all started, and I heard various of Ollie's guests talking about novel food, I thought, oh, it's donuts with this, mincemeat flavor, or so. I didn't know. I really had no idea it is. For people who don't, who aren't so enmeshed in this whole industry, can you, in very simple terms, say what novel foods are?
So novel food is about safety, about consumer safety. So under EU regulations, if a food hasn't been in regular human consumption prior to 1997, then it's got to have novel food approval before it can be sold in Europe and now in the UK. And it's just about making sure that if people are consuming a product for a long period of time, there's no horrible side effects or damage caused over the long-term period of consumption. That's what novel foods is about.
So can I ask a really dumb question.
No questions done, Ross.
Well, today, for example, I popped into my local shop and I bought some vegan cheese. Now, in 1997, such a thing would not have existed. Packaged, sliced vegan cheese. Is that novel food?
Potentially not. Cheese itself has obviously been in regular human consumption for a very long time. Some of the production methods, how the product is manufactured, can also be relevant. If they're using a particularly new technology in terms of how it's manufactured, then yes, it could potentially be novel. But if they're using traditional food processing methods, then the likelihood it probably wouldn't fall into that category.
Okay.
Also, it's important to know that most vegan cheese is like nut based. And nut-based concoctions have been around. Nut butters, nut cheeses have actually been around for a very long time. They're just not common. So, I mean, that's also something else. It's about the base ingredient and whether the base ingredient has whether that has come into play. And the problem is it's like a crusade against hemp. It's the crusade against hemp, that hemp was not used in the format that it's saying it's been used. And that's what it is. Novel food has been an absolute nightmare. And we also, like, as a company, it's been a very eventful journey. Once again, we've approached, scientific technicians. We haven't approached lawyers to get it done. Like I said, the whole process has just been a bit of a mind numb. And
So,
I'll tell you the annoying thing.
Ollie, if you wanted, with your company, say, what would a novel food be that
You just interrupted me, Russ.
I did, because it's an interesting point you're making, but I have to act as everyman.
Fine.
And my everyman question is this. You said you didn't go to lawyers, and I can understand Robert staying away.
Robert said no. I mean,
he said no. He's not daft.
So therefore, he said no. So therefore, we had no other option.
That's why he looks young and happy. He's not, he doesn't represent you. That's why he's happy and jolly. What if you wanted to bring in a novel food product, Ollie? What would that be? Give us some idea. I don't know. What would it be?
Insects, Russ. So there's been some interesting novel food cases in relation to insects that are now being consumed as food.
Wow.
And there's no sort of scientific basis or evidence for them being consumed prior to 1997.
Fine. So there's a South African herb. There's a South African herb which they've just brought to the market. It's some form of sleep herb which they use in South Africa, which is like really, really, really good. It's never been present on the UK market. It's like a tribal herb. Stuff like that is very difficult. Kava is illegal in the UK. It's a novel food. Acai berry went through the process, but it was deemed legitimate. So it's basically any product which wasn't available in the supermarket pre-1997 in a Western world. It's not even about in the world. It's in Western civilization. If it was not available, they'll start to question the hell out of it. And it is for safety, like Robert said. I understand the logic behind it, but the processes behind proving safety. I mean, if you've got 1.8 million people consuming CBD on a daily basis and no one's dying, I mean, this stuff's pretty safe. I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, it's got to mean something. And that logic has not fallen into play. And when logic doesn't fall into play, then you're like, well, what are these rules actually based on? But it's not a novel food conversation today. If Robert wants to come back at a later date, I would love to have this conversation with him again. And I feel really bad because we've wasted 15 minutes.
Well, I want to just finish off there, actually, because, we're all looking at the FSA thinking, oh, well, they let us have it as novel food. But why haven't they stopped glucose fructose syrup? Why haven't they stopped aspartame? Why haven't they stopped sulfame K? They're all novel foods. They're all approved by the FSA, and they're all poisonous.
What was the last one, Phil? The others I know are in various fizzy drinks. What's the last one?
Sulfame K,
right?
Aspartame, sulfame K, and glucose fructose syrup, and all of its alternative names. They're all highly toxic substances to human health, but they're in most of the cheaper, lower shelf products. You don't find them on the higher shelf. You find them on the bottom shelf, where I tend to shop. And it basically, if you ask me, it's like a poisoning off of the poor people, actually, because the expensive food doesn't have these toxic ingredients, but the low price food does have these toxic ingredients. So I personally question the validity of the FSA completely, and about whether it's just like Ollie said, an attack on hemp, any excuse to try and keep it banned.
There are a few sugars which I've got in my lab, so my mind's gone completely blank. I can literally see the packaging, but my mind's gone completely blank. But there are some of these sugars, these super refined sugars which they'll use in candy making or whatever. And they talk about if you give your dog 5 milligrams, your dog will die. Okay,
Wow.
but it's all right for humans. And at one moment, I'm like, all right, there's
Well,
something.
if I give my dog chocolate or avocado, it's going to die as well.
Yeah,
props to
fine.
Phil Monk, Melanie Hutchins, one of our regular viewers and listeners. Hi, Melanie. Exactly, aspartame should have been banned years ago. So you're not speaking into the wilderness there, Phil.
That's good to
You're
hear
speaking
for a
to
change.
people.
My
Simon
opinions are
Carter,
valid.
Buenos Chicos, and Philip Anthony Bevington has said, good
Oh, we
evening,
love Phil.
Phil, Robert,
Hey,
Oliver,
Tony.
and Russ. And good evening to you, Philip.
What's up, Tony?
How lovely that is.
Oh,
Yeah,
my friend, I like him. He's
an
a
amazing
good
guest
dude.
he was.
He's a good dude.
He is a good dude. Okay. Right.
So let's talk about you two, you beautiful faces in the bottom half of the screen. Tell us how you guys got together. This is what happens when I don't have a script. This is what happens.
Is there a lesson to be learnt here, Oliver?
So it's worth a try. People might enjoy it. So how did you guys get together?
It comes about from my frustrations, basically. If we go back, we have to rewind now to 2000 and early 2018. We had in the time on the news was Murray Gray from Scotland. We had Alfie Dingley and we had Billy Caldwell from Ireland. And they were in the news very much at the time about being denied access to a cannabis-based medicine.
These were all children, right?
They were all children. They were all children, yes, epileptic, and they had cannabis to reduce their seizures. And they were at the front of quite a strong campaign that led to the 2018 law change for cannabis for medical purposes. And the publicity campaign actually got me really incensed and furious, angry. I'd been to a rally in Patients at Parliament, United Patients Alliance, February of 2018. We the Undersigned didn't exist then. I was actually just supporting other people's groups. And I've always believed the prohibition of cannabis is an infringement upon our fundamental human rights. As I mentioned previously, our right to freedom of consciousness, autonomy of health, development of personality, the rights to freedom of private beliefs and practices, and the freedom of association. So when I got home from that UPA protest, I became very angry and I basically set out, I want to find a human rights solicitor and make a human rights case, but not just for me, but for everybody's human rights. So I set out a little invitation to people saying, I'm going to write to every human rights solicitor in the country. Would anybody like to become undersigned to my letter? And I took my daughters to Taekwondo for a couple of hours, came back, and then my phone was melted with notifications, basically, where people were accepting my invitation. So I very quickly had to build a group on Facebook for people. We, the undersigned, have a human sovereign right to cannabis. And then I we wrote a letter that was basically evidenced our argument, as it were. And Robert will testify to this. It was a very lengthy email. And I basically spent 12 months writing to every human rights solicitor in the country that I could find. All of them kept replying to me saying, no, sorry, it's too political, will take too long, and is too expensive. It didn't stop me. I kept trying. And eventually somebody shared into our group an article that was just discussing Robert having launched as a new cannabis law solicitor. And somebody said to me, now, have you tried this fellow yet? So I sent this email to Robert, which he received. And I suppose that's an ideal opportunity for you to interject there, Robert.
Yeah, so I think I received the email.
Let's interrupt quickly. So just before you start. So I've heard about this email, all right, and that's why I'm sitting here smiling, because I remember this story, and I've heard this story from Phil, and I've heard this story from Robert, and I just want to say, I want to see if they match up. Do you know what I mean? Because I know the way Robert reacted to that email, and I know the way Phil wrote that email, and I just want to see if the truth comes out here, which I'm really excited about. Do you know what I mean? Like it's one of those stories you get to rehear. It's kind of making me smile.
Well, I tell you what, Ollie, I will forward it to you afterwards, and also Russ, if you wish.
I heard it was something like 630 pages. I heard it was like
not quite that long.
It's like the longest email ever written. You know,
if it's more than 6 paragraphs, I'm not going to read it.
Go on, Robert. Sorry, carry on.
I'm terrible like that. I won't.
It was by far the longest email I've ever received. It was at least, if I recall correctly, it was about 38 or 39 paragraphs. We're not talking a couple of lines in each paragraph. It was
evident.
Substantial. And I think it was a Sunday I received it, and I was just on my laptop in front of the TV doing a bit of work, and I got this email, and I just thought, yeah, I'm not reading that. And I could have dismissed it, but I didn't want to, because I know Phil. I could see Phil had obviously taken time to write all of this, and so do you know what? I thought, I'm just going to short circuit this, and I emailed back and I just said, Phil, should we have a chat about this tomorrow? And I'm really glad that I did that, you know. And as soon as I spoke to Phil and heard about what it was he was trying to do, I knew straight away I wanted to be involved. So. Although I didn't read the whole email, the fact that Phil had gone to such an effort to write 39 lengthy paragraphs on what he was proposing, it certainly justified a response, and so that's how it came about.
That's very, very impressive. I mean, Phil, you're nothing if not absolutely passionate and dedicated. Extraordinary. I would have done the same thing and said, look, I'm not going to wade through this. Give me a call.
Well, the actual email was written by the WTU community, in fact, because people weren't happy just to undersign blindly to my letter. So this letter was drafted by the entire community, not just individually myself. And each paragraph was evidenced to a source. So there's no arguing it. It's actually all evidenced fact, everything that we stated. But yeah, it was basically the outline of our entire case. Once Robert accepted, we then launched a crowd justice fundraiser, No More War on the Canna community, because the government are at war. Last week, Ollie said to the listeners, Phil didn't just wake up one morning and decide to go to war with the government. And that's been resonating in my mind for the whole week, because no, I didn't. The government's been at war with us as a populace for, well, nearly 100 years through the Misuse of Drugs Act and the war on cannabis. So all I've done actually is started to defend myself in the war that they've started against us and our people.
I just mainly wanted to make the point of how much you had actually suffered. Also, the fact that you weren't born and raised a cannabis advocate. Do you know what I mean? You didn't come from some hippie Quaker family where this was drummed down your brain and you had no other option to believe this. As in, you know, you were a sporty kid who wasn't pro cannabis, you weren't pro drugs, and then, you know, you had this journey that you've gone on, which has formed this understanding of yours, and that's what I kind of meant by it. You know,
with no disrespect to what you said.
Oh, no, I know.
And what it did, you see, and the government have actually created me who I am today, because when I started telling you last week, I researched the effects of cannabis on human health because I was having my arm shortened and I wanted to know how my bones would heal. And while I was researching, and I learned about THC and CBD, and I found papers from Edinburgh University that show that cannabis maintain, regulate bone growth, density, and development. I found out about how cannabis maintains homeostasis and regulates human health through the endocannabinoid system. And then I found a most interesting article from 1998. It was Philip Robson, The Therapeutic Aspects of Cannabinoids, and it was commissioned by the then Health Department in 1996 to investigate the effects of cannabis upon the human health. And in 1998, they returned the paper to government with, in short, three remarkable findings. Was that cannabis is remarkably safe with a long history of therapeutic use in humans. Queen Victoria used to use it for her periods. The government should, the researcher needed time to develop marketable cannabis-based products, and the government should cease the criminalization of peaceful people who seek to assuage their symptoms with cannabis. The government of the day shelved that report immediately in the Library of Science, and the author was set up as GW Pharmaceuticals and became their medical director. They've just been sold for over £5 billion now.
5.3 billion.
Yeah, I've got nearly 140 cannabis patents that they've developed in 21 years. So when I found that research paper that informed our government that cannabis is remarkably safe, therapeutic, they needed time to make patented products, and they should stop prosecuting people like me. For me, that's been 21 years of false prosecutions. They had no basis for the policy that they've been enforcing on people. So that was, for me, what really incensed me and got me enraged the way I am. And that's when I set out to try and find a solicitor to help make the human rights case.
Can I just again ask what might seem a daft question, but just cutting down to the chase, Phil?
Yeah.
If I'm reading the subtext of what you've just said, are you saying that this report was done and somebody thought, hang on a minute, we could make a fortune out of this?
That's
So
exactly what I'm saying.
they shelved it. It went to a company who had the backing, the resources, the finances to develop all this stuff. They developed all of the patents, which of course worth a fortune, and boom, you get sold for £5.3 billion.
Exactly what I'm saying. I'm basically Rob might interject here, but I'm accusing the British government of fraud, conspiracy, and terrorism. Basically, 21 years of unjustified prosecutions.
Let me just interject here quickly. We okay? We're good. Sorry, let me just interject here quickly. So you've got this incredible idea, which is actually, this cannabis farm. And I would have to disagree with Phil, but I agree with him. No, I tell you why. Okay, look, in one respect, I have to disagree with him because the rest of the world has opened up, and the rest of the world has allowed many companies to have this competition with each other, creating a cannabis marketplace. In the UK, we've had a monopoly. And part of me really wants to disagree with Phil because I look at the rest of the world. But unfortunately, we can't look at the rest of the world. We have to look at the UK. And in the UK, we have had a monopoly for 21 years. And still to this moment, even after that monopoly has just been sold for £5.3 billion, the ability for an individual like myself, like Phil, or like you, Russ, to go out there, source the money and build that company is so restricted, and it doesn't make sense. And that's what I don't understand. Even like, the richest man in the UK couldn't go out there and rebuild that company. And that is not free market economics. So the terrorism I have to disagree with because I don't like using the word terrorism. But in terms of general free market economics, which is a law in the UK, it doesn't exist. And as we've seen from people like Bartley, or as we've seen from people like, what's it called? George Thomas. Yeah. George Thomas from Sativa Wellness Group.
Jeremy Thomas.
Jeremy Thomas?
Jeremy Thomas from Sativa Wellness, yeah.
George
There
Botanical.
is a George Thomas. Anyway.
George?
Let's look at.
No, it is definitely George. Maybe Thomas is wrong. Maybe when I don't have notes, my mind goes to mush. So basically, but George from George Botanical from Sativa Wellness Group basically told us how he has that license to produce cannabis, but he's not actually allowed to do anything with it. He's monopolized. He's controlled in what he's allowed to do. He's not allowed to create API patents. He's not allowed to create active pharmaceutical ingredients. And it's that monopoly which kind of forces me to agree with Phil, which I hate doing. I love disagreeing with him because it makes a better conversation. But in fairness, there's no other option. There's no one else out there who's doing what GW is doing.
Before we come back to Robert, let me just look at some of the fantastic comments that are coming in. Really hitting home today, everybody. Veronica Curran. Hi, Veronica. Sheer passion, Phil. Totally get it. I follow Murray and other It's Passion. Now, Tony Bevington, and we would love to know the upshot of your case, Tony, at some point, because it just stunned me what happened to you at 81 years old, for God's sake. And he goes, come on, Oliver, do you equate hippies and Quakers as synonymous? Well,
no, not at all. No,
he's just doing
I know.
He's just doing enough. He's just doing.
You know what I meant by that comment, didn't you, Phil? And if you were born and raised in, basically, if you were born and raised in Humboldt County,
he's yanking your chain. He knows.
Come on, Anne, I don't have a script. Work with me, okay?
Stop it. Now, Melanie Hutchins. I think this is the first time on this show, but this is what I've dreamed of, trying to migrate this through to more of the regular WRS and MRS listeners. And she says this, Ollie, which I think you're going to be interested with. I'm all new to this and I'm finding it fascinating. The interview that Callie did the other day, it was yesterday, has got me wanting more info. That's all we ever wanted to do with the ABC of CBD.
Well, we've got 33 episodes on SoundCloud, which you can is basically an encyclopedia of this industry, provided by myself and some of the greatest minds the UK cannabis industry has to offer.
They are really extraordinary. And the other thing I want to say, and I'm sorry, Phil, I know you're going to raise your eyebrows. Don't forget, these are the views of the individuals who are guests on the show. We're not saying they are the views of men's radio station, not the views of women's radio station, not necessarily even my views whatsoever. But I'm just saying that these are the views of our guests, of which, of course, they are absolutely 100% entitled to.
By the way, if anyone out there wants to come and portray the opposite view, contact me. We'll get you on the show. You know, this is all about the platform for discussion. I really don't want to have a monotone, single, non-broad view of this world. I really want to create a discussion. So if anyone out there is listening and thinking, I hate this guy, by all means, come on the show. It'll be an absolute pleasure to have you here. And I promise you I'll be nice. I promise you I'll be nice.
I think people are probably thinking, Ollie, what they're really thinking is not that they hate you. It's this. Why couldn't Ollie be wearing Phil's T-shirt and then they would have matched his headset and that would have been perfect? I think that's really what's drawing their attention. Now, Robert, you're a lawyer, for goodness sake. Where do you stand with what Phil... Some of the language gets quite heated. We know that because Phil's a very passionate guy. And without passion, where would any of us be, right? But where do you stand on this on legally? Do you think we've been hoodwinked? Because it's an extraordinary thing. I'd never joined the dots, Phil. Like you just said in that last...
before Robert asked this question, in the year that GW was set up, my brother was sent to prison for possession of a harmful Schedule 1 drug called cannabis. He then left as a heroin addict and is now dead, like I covered in the previous show. So in the year that GW was set up, my brother was sent to prison for a harmful Schedule 1 drug. Every year since, they've had patents and they've made all these millions. But my brother's now dead. And he cultivated cannabis. He did exactly the same thing. So why is it...
He did really what Tony Bevington... Tony...
He did what I'm doing.
Melanie, this will blow you away. Tony is very, very briefly, because it was such an extraordinary story and it's stuck in my mind for months and months and months. Tony is an 81-year-old guy. He was told by the doctor, you're going to die. So he says to the doctor, nothing's going to work. So he says to the doctor, well, I'll take some cannabis oil. They said, you can't do that. It's going to kill you. So this 81-year-old man goes, you've just told me 3 minutes ago that I'm going to die anyway. So he goes to his garage, minding his own business, and he grows 6 little plants. And because he is an expert in that field, he turned them into oils and he reversed his illness, took away the pain, blah, blah, blah. It's a fantastic story. Okay. His neighbor dobs him into the police. And although the police didn't want to do it, let's just stress that, the guy was arrested at 81 years old. I mean, it's hardly the craze, is it? It's not El Chapo, and there's one bloke with 6 plants in his garage, for Christ's sake, minding his own business, not selling it to anybody. He's trying to save his life. And he is arrested and he's on trial and the whole thing. And I don't know how the trial went. So
Phil knows. Phil's very close with Ant.
He was found guilty, but he's on a 2-year suspended sentence. He didn't get sent to prison because he... thankfully was generously fundraised enough money by the community to pay for a private cannabis prescription. So once he accessed a prescription for cannabis, the courts referred to the prescription as, oh, that's very modern, then decided, well, he acknowledged his guilt as well. So they just found him guilty, 2 years suspended sentence.
Bless him. At 81. Please God, he's around at the end of the 2 years, considering how he is.
Well, this is the thing.
Can I just give everyone a little piece of advice, by the way? It's very important I say this to you, everyone out there. If you are doing what Philip's doing and you get a knock on your door by police and they say, are you growing cannabis? Just don't say yes, okay? Because I really do believe if Philip just said, no, of course I'm not, none of this would have ever happened.
Well, they'd have gone and found a warrant and come back.
No, they would. No, Ollie, that can't be. I mean, Robert's looking like Robert's got.
I always say deny. That's the best lawyer advice in the world.
Let's all be grown up. Let's all be grown up about this for a second. I'm really looking at Robert's face, and he's going, "That's his." Well, I mean, if he says no, and they go away, and the neighbour, for whatever reason, I don't know who the hell, and they come back with a warrant, and they're going to search his house. It's come on.
They would have come back
33 that's going to take 20 seconds to resolve, isn't it?
I don't think you get in more trouble. I don't think you get in more trouble for being found guilty or admitting you're guilty.
So I think Ollie is quite right, actually. I'm always I'm always of the opinion
What was that? Hold on. Repeat that.
Whoa, get that in writing, Ollie. Christ.
if you, for example, if you get stopped by the police and you've been drinking or you've smoked a spliff or something, and they say, "Have you been drinking?" If
No.
you say I had one beer, you're going to get breathalyzed. If you say no, there's a chance you might not get breathalyzed. If they say, "Why did you run that red light?" you say it was green. If they say, "Have you been smoking anything?" you say no, because that is the only way you may not get breathalyzed or swab test or tested or whatever. So if they come to your door and say, "Are you growing cannabis?" you say no. There is then a chance the police will go away and not bother coming back because they've got better things to do. Of course, they may go and get a warrant and come back. But if you say, "Yes, I'm growing cannabis," they're coming in. That's the only outcome. So I'm very much of the opinion, deny everything.
And I would stress on behalf of Men's Radio, by the way, please don't drink and drive, and please don't do
Definitely
drugs
don't drink and
of any
drive. Definitely
description,
don't smoke
and then
and
get
drive.
behind the wheel. That is
I wasn't
safe.
talking about driving, Russ. I never mentioned driving and drinking. I just said if the police shop at your house.
Our legal expert.
Let him just cover himself.
So he opened the door and I simply walked in. And by the way, Tony Bevington's saying it was 24 plants. You are El Chapo. I thought it was 6. There we go. It was actually, wow. Wowee there. They've been making films.
Tony's only safe so long as he continues to access his cannabis via a private prescription. The moment he accesses his cannabis from an alternative source that isn't from this prescriber, either through homegrown or the alternative market, he then will be in breach of his 2-year suspended sentence and theoretically be liable for prison.
So let me just ask you this in that case, and this is a question again of economics, and I've no idea, so I'm putting it to Phil and Robert. Right, I don't know Tony's circumstances. Let's assume he's not a squillionaire. He's growing his plants in his garage. It's costing him threepence halfpenny. Right, how much would his medicines be costing him roughly?
I actually know this because I've spoken to him.
Okay.
So, I mean, like, if none of you know the answer, I actually know the answer.
I don't know the specific figure as it happens. I know it was, as it happens for Tony, because
it's relatively affordable.
It is very affordable. He doesn't use a high amount of cannabis tincture or flowers, and it's actually transpired to be cheaper for him than growing for himself as it happens.
Yeah, so I think Philip pays like 70 quid a month or something for his bottle of 1-to-1 drops, which is actually not a lot of money. And also he's gone through life sciences. So life sciences have a slightly reduced price compared to, let's say, some of the other cannabis clinics out there. And like you said, he's using a tincture and he's taking very small doses and it works well for him. It's when you get the kids like Taneen's child who's using a £1,000 worth of Bedrocan on a monthly basis, and the doses have to keep on going up because tolerance is built. Or you get people like Phil who are habitual medical cannabis users. I know you don't like that term, but just let me have it. All right, habitual medical cannabis users. And fact of the matter is there's a certain.
Well, only if you admit then that the cannabis growing in my cupboard is medical cannabis then.
1,000,000% is medical cannabis.
We're all right. Carry on.
All cannabis is medical.
Thank God there's a lawyer here. That's all I got to say.
All cannabis is medical because if you're going to use it for a medicinal reason, it's medical. So that's basically my logic. So what I want to say is Philip's very lucky because of the amount of cannabinoids he actually needs being relatively minimal to reduce his ailments. All right. But there are some people out there who are not that lucky. They're not that fortunate, either through, their genetic makeup, which means that the cannabis they consume is less effective to them, or the levels of pain which they're in means that they need to consume such large amounts of cannabis.
Or tolerance, as you mentioned previously. And I'd also throw in there cancer. If you're a cancer patient, you're treating your cancer with your homegrown, you need a lot of cannabis. You need a lot of the FECO, full extract cannabis oil. So, that's where the plant numbers come in quite a lot. But in terms of...
So talking about like 15, 20 times what the average consumer would use when you're trying to kill cancer. So like pain is like 50 to 100. Sorry, go.
I don't know what I would cost if I went to a clinic, say, and told them
millions
how much cannabis, because I make my own tinctures, I make my own capsules, I make my own balms.
30 to 50 grand a month.
Flower.
You're like a one-man Holland and Barrett, aren't you, really?
Yeah, I am. I've had to become.
Right, and as we've got experts, especially as we've got a lawyer, let me throw some of these questions because I cannot answer the questions.
All about.
I don't even understand the questions. One from Lee Mallet. Hello, Lee. Good evening to you.
Hey, Lee.
What are your views on Clear/Canapro for those concerned about being arrested? I don't understand the question, but I know you will. you want to read it again? You with it?
I'm presuming it's going to be relating to other campaign groups there. I'm presuming Clear and Canna Pro. Ollie and Robert might agree they've heard of those.
Clear and Canna Pro is Peter Reynolds, isn't it? They're
Yes.
Peter Reynolds' group. And I've met Peter, and he's always been very pleasant and polite to me. I know there are lots of people in the industry that don't like what he does, but he's an OG, isn't he? He's been around for a long time. So in relation to that question, I don't know what advice they are giving in relation to being arrested, so I can't really comment on it, but I do like Peter.
Advocacy and activism's not really my strong point. That's why I get the guests on, to be honest with you. So go on, Phil, wrap it up.
Well, I don't know what Canna Pro are advising about arrests as it happens. And well, I have to be careful what I say. Like Robert just mentioned, industry. Some people are in an industry and some people are still in the war that's been going on for decades. And we're actually having this transition from war to industry. So Peter Reynolds, for example, he overlaps between war and industry. He's got a bit of a murky history, like Robert mentioned, because they legalized Cannabis Alliance. There are people that feel he infiltrated and took over the group, and some people would accuse him of being controlled opposition and grassroots astroturfing from the government. But I use those words "would accuse" because I haven't got any evidence of that. But I can't sit here and not speak honestly.
I think what we'll do, Phil, is
we've got to get Peter on the show.
We'll reverse ourselves out of this.
Exactly what you should do.
What we're going to do is going to reverse ourselves out of this legal cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And head on down the A1 and say. And here's a question from Simon Carter, which I think everybody can answer, apart from me, because I haven't a clue. Where does the panel see the de facto decriminalization leading to? And I'm going to start.
Oh my God, Phil's dying for this. You
Phil,
love this.
Just to wind him up and make him come second here. So, Robert.
So look, this actually goes to the heart of this question. Goes to the heart of what the WTU is about, right? Okay, so there are lots of organisations lobbying to get real change in government, in legislation, to open up access to cannabis, whether it be medicinal or adult use. These organisations have decided that the best way to achieve change is to break down policy into bite-sized chunks, right? And then each bite-sized chunk you present to the politicians, and hopefully you can persuade them to put it through. And they see that as a stepping stone to the next stage, and then to the next stage, and to the next stage. So you have some really good organisations, like, for example, Release is a drugs and human rights charity that campaigns for the decriminalisation of drug possession. And if you speak to the guys at Release, they obviously want full access, full legalisation, but they see decriminalisation as a stepping stone, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's actually a tried and tested method of getting to your eventual goal, is to go via stepping stones. The problem with that is not everybody has time to wait for each stepping stone to be achieved. And that is Phil's position. Phil and the members of the WTU, they need real change right now. They haven't got 5 years or 10 years to wait for little policy chunks to be chipped away like this. And so, yes, fully in favour of decriminalisation. Yes, I hope it would be a stepping stone to further legalisation and regulation. But I'm sure Phil will say decriminalisation isn't enough, and it's not enough in the immediate term.
Can I just interrupt quickly? We're talking about de facto decriminalisation. So de facto decriminalisation is also one step back. De facto decriminalisation is me as a police officer gets to decide if you are going to be in the decriminalised box or the not decriminalised box. So if anything, it's even one step back. It kind of gives judgment to the individual who's basically throwing down the punishment. If I understand it correctly, that's what I understand from de facto decriminalisation.
Is that right, Robert?
I mean, there's lots of types of decriminalisation. I mean, you can have a decriminalisation for a particular location. So, for example, if you were to set up a cannabis smoking club or a social club, you could maybe reach out to the local authorities and the local police and say, right, if we all just smoke cannabis in this particular location, will you leave us alone? And they may agree. I mean, it'll probably be an informal arrangement. They're not going to sign a contract with you saying we won't arrest you. But you could have de facto decriminalisation in particular to a specific situation area. But yes, you would still need the agreement of the authorities.
You see,
Otherwise,
it's interesting. Going back to Tony Bevington's case, and Melanie Hutchins says, I'm so glad you're enjoying this, Melanie. Just so pleased that the guy, that's Tony, has got better. At the end of the day, that's amazing, but he shouldn't have had to deal with that kind of hassle. Well, he was, as I said, 81 years old. He was an amazing guest.
Plus, he's so lovely.
And yeah, you wouldn't think, you think he's like 60 or so. He's not
so
like,
lovely.
He's not like Clive Dunn in Dad's Army, right? So here's the thing. And to back up what Robert's just said, and to make a point to Melanie, the policeman didn't want to do this, by the way. The police had no interest whatsoever in it. Wasn't like they were catching a master criminal. It's an 81-year-old guy who's seriously ill. And they made it kind of pretty, they were almost apologetic. I mean, that was the gist of the interview. They were pretty apologetic, but our hands are tied. We have to do this now because X, Y, and Z has happened. So, you know, it wasn't like they were thrilled.
I think what the question Simon Carter might be referring to with this de facto decriminalization also might be that another campaign called Outlaw that some of your viewers may or may not be aware of. There's a gentleman called Outlaw. He actually protects his identity. He keeps a balaclava on. He's a music producer. And he has raised the funds independently to move ahead. The WTU were hoping to make a judicial review against the government's policy, but we haven't raised the money, unfortunately, so we can't proceed because we haven't got the security of costs. This other individual does have security of costs, and he has just released an evidence document similar to the way WTU has, and that document, I believe, is intending to put the British police force on notice because, in effect, they're saying that the policy itself is fraudulent because it doesn't have the evidence to back it up. It's not in the public interest to pursue prosecutions. So that might be the de facto criminalization that they are referring to and hoping that that campaign group intends to put the whole police force on notice. And also, if police continue to pursue individuals, then the police will be held liable for their actions too, is the intent.
Why, Phil?
Yeah.
And it's a serious question. I'm not being flippant here. In the interests of transparency, and you've been, you know, whether people agree with you or don't agree with you, you're not hiding behind anything. You're saying, I'm Phil Monk. This is who I am. This is what I believe. And bosh, you know, fair enough. And that's, I think that's admirable because whether it's irrelevant whether people agree with you or not. You're there. Why would you? I would not have you as a guest if Ollie said, "Oh, can we have so and so?" But he has to wear a balaclava. I'd say no. Absolutely not. That would stand against.
Yeah.
Why would are
you serious? That? Outlaw's coming on next week wearing a balaclava.
Yeah,
it's a fancy generation. No one wants to see a face anymore. It's like Dead Mouse. You know, when you go to his gig, no one wants to see what DJs look like, artists look like, and activists look like. It's that holiday, like, hide behind the mask.
Part of the issue, the hiding behind the mask, is to protect his professional persona identity. Because he doesn't want to be recognized as the professional person who he is behind it all. That's all I can say. That's what he's discussed with me in meetings. So he does it to protect his identity so as not to impact upon his professional career.
Well, I don't say who he is. I'm not asking, but
we don't know.
A musician.
That's all we know. That's all that's known. That's on his website. That's all that's known.
You've spoken to him? Have you met him? This fellow?
I haven't met. I've had Zoom conferences with him in his balaclava and a voice disruptor, which was most peculiar. I won't deny it. Very, and it made me feel like
I'd find it deeply disturbing.
You know, Ollie said, well, I disagree with the terrorism, but I live in constant fear of armed men with padded gear smashing through my house and terrorizing my family. I live in terror. Outlaw
Have you ever
himself,
been raided like that?
No, I haven't.
Phil, why
are you scared of it?
Yeah, I was going to say, why would you assume they're going to be armed?
And why do you think they're going to come so aggressively?
Because
I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm sorry.
I'll answer your question. When I started growing, I spoke with Neil Woods, who was an undercover officer. He now works for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And I asked Neil, how do the police determine how they do a drugs bust? And he said, usually because they've got no information, they go in hard and fast to secure evidence and witnesses, and also a bit of shock and awe tactics. So in response to that, because I'd been interviewed by local press having founded WTU, I then called my local police to provide my domestic contextual setting to them. so that they know they don't need to use force nor violence if ever they need to investigate a public complaint at my property. So I called them up and told them everything that I do, and they were surprised by my honesty, and still haven't come to arrest me to this day. But it was to give them the contextual knowledge, so if ever the police get a complaint about me or my property, they should have it on their file. He's a disabled man raising children. You don't need to go in all guns blazing, causing violence. You ask about why would they be armed? Last year, in a drugs bust, an innocent man was shot dead by the police during one of their drugs busts. So they do drug busts armed. They go in with chainsaws to chainsaw through.
I was going to make this point. If you think you're listening to Phil and you go, "Oh, he's being extreme. That's ridiculous." If I hadn't seen it myself about 3 weeks ago, I would say, "Oh, Phil's just making a big hoo-ha."
What do you mean, Russ?
Hang on, I'm going to explain. There is a broadcaster. I'm not going to say who it is. He has a huge amount of followers on YouTube, something like 250,000. He's very outspoken. Please don't say his name. All right.
I don't know him.
Well, fine. Okay. And the police knock at his door. Now he's just a broadcaster. He's nothing to do with this industry, your industry at all. He broadcasts. That's it. He's ex-BBC. And some of the stuff he says.
Well, if he was ITV, no one would care. It's because he's BBC. If he was Channel 5, no one would even know him.
Well, they're ex-BBC. He's ex-BBC. That's not the point. The police arrive, and as Phil has described, he lives, as far as I know, I don't know the guy. I've never spoken to the guy, so it's not like a friend of mine or anything. And they're all padded up. They're in a specific police van, not a normal van, right? And so he's calling from the upstairs window. So this is all being filmed. And he says, "If you come to arrest me," they said, "Will you open the door?" He says, "Well, I just want to phone my lawyer. I'll be down. Will you? It won't be a second." And they chainsaw his front door. Not if or perhaps. You just see.
What did this guy do wrong?
Well, I'm not going to get into that at all. That is a whole other can of worms.
Can I share a story
from this fellow's side of it? Nothing whatsoever, and they've raided his house 3 or 4 times, take all his stuff away, then they return. It's a very, very peculiar thing, and I don't want to get into it. The point I was trying to make is, for something as just broadcasting on YouTube, have your front door chainsawed. I'm hearing what Phil is saying.
I never had my front door chainsawed, but I have had police show up at my house before. I had some DVDs sent from America. It was seized. I received a letter. They said, "You're trying to import THC." I said, "No, I'm not." And they said, "Well, we've received your packages." And I was like, "What packages?" They go, "The packages with THC." And I said, "Well, I haven't sent myself any THC." They go, "We've seized your FedEx packages. Be expecting a visit." And I had 2 really lovely policewomen show up at the door. They rang the doorbell. They came inside. They were really cute with the dog. They walked around my house. They looked at me and they were like, "You don't look like a drug dealer." And I was like, "No, I make bath bombs for a living." And they looked at me.
Some conjecture, isn't it?
Hold on. And they looked at me and they were like, "What do you mean you make bath bombs?" So I showed them my little research and development lab. And they're like, "Oh, you actually make bath bombs for a living?" I was like, "What do you think?" As in, like, when I say I make bath bombs for a living, I was like, who's going to lie about that? So when they looked at me and they said, "What about your business partner? Because we have a warrant to search his house too." And I was like, "Honestly, he'll get divorced. If you go and raid his house right now, his wife is going to leave him. All right. Considering you found bath bombs here, what do you think you're going to find there?" And they were like, "All right, cool. We'll take your word for it." Never went to his house. Now, I'm not saying that's the standard, but I think I had a really lovely time. I ended up having a cup of tea with them, chatting. I smoked a few cigarettes. They were just there. It was quite lovely.
Did they get any bath bomb samples? Did they get any bath bomb samples?
So I offered them. I offered them bath bomb samples.
If it makes you feel any better, Ollie, if it makes you feel any better, and Phil, in all seriousness, I bought something off Facebook. Just came up on my Facebook feed, and I bought something on Facebook, and I turned up one day from the excitement of shopping at Tesco, and there were 2 uniformed police officers on my front door. "Are you Mr. So?" "Yes, I am." Blah blah blah. "Did you buy?" I said, "Yes, I bought it on Facebook." "Oh, it's been confiscated." I went, "Okay. Do you want to fight the cash?" "Guys, it's like a £11 purchase." "Of course not." Whatever.
What did you buy? Like a samurai sword or something?
No.
Did you buy a machete? You bought a gun, didn't you?
buy a machete.
Definitely something.
Nunchucks.
It was
Nunchucks.
It's not going to be
always
that.
the nunchucks.
It's not going to be that exciting if it literally came off my face, not the dark web. It was just on Facebook, along with lots of silly jokes from my friends. So, and I said, guys, I'm sorry you've had such a wasted journey. And I thought, wow, 2 uniformed police officers for an 11 quid purchase. Well, anyway, there we are. They were perfectly charming, and there we are.
It's sad though what happens to some people in our industry, and to be honest with you, they don't deserve it. And especially people like you, Phil, who are literally, doing it to give yourselves a better life. I mean, and you're so open about it, and everyone knows. I mean, all you got to do is Google your name, and you know exactly why you do what you do.
Everyone uses cannabis to give themselves a better life.
1,000,000%.
Everyone, even if they haven't got a specific medical condition.
Yeah, but you're here, so I can talk to you. I can't talk to them.
I have to say that because people say, "Oh, but he's got a genuine reason for using it." You shouldn't have to have a genuine reason. You have an endocannabinoid system. That is your genuine reason for using cannabis.
So I had this conversation with someone yesterday, and I was like, all right, cool. So you're not a medical user, you're a recreational user. He goes, yeah. I go, so when do you use? He goes, mainly the end of the day. And I go, why? He goes, well, I'm stressed at the end of the day. And I was like, bam, medical. And he was like, what? I was like, bam, that's medical. If you were in America right now and you were stressed and you went to a doctor, you say, I'm stressed every day, they'll give you Valium or some other type of pill to help you go to bed. That's like it's a standard medicinal issue is stress. Most people don't put A and B together. They don't realize that why they're using something over something else, why I'm using a joint over a glass of whiskey, why I'm using a joint over a pill. Turn yourself sideways, Phil, you're perfect. And it's like the mentality of the population has been indoctrinated into understanding that it's doing something wrong when actually they might be doing something right. And it's a shame because, a lot of people out there would potentially benefit from access to cannabinoids if they understood that they could actually get medicinal benefit from them as opposed to just being demonized and,
Unfortunately, it seems that Phil's phone is now on drugs and we've got to go like that.
Sorry about that. Seems to have a bit of phone malfunction.
Robert, as we're winding up, I can't believe that this show has gone by like rocket
so quick.
Boom! It's been tremendous. Thank you thank you all so much, Robert. Where do you think the next? Let's just try and look into Robert Jappy's crystal ball. Where do you think the next 5 years is going to take us?
I very much think that we have to keep looking what happens in America. If you saw
about that phone call, can you hear me now?
Yeah, good.
Brilliant.
What was it 2-3 weeks ago? We already had Sadiq Khan talking about decriminalizing cannabis in London, and that was a direct result of New York, the state, going fully legal in the US. New York State is one of the most populous states in the US. So for them to have a fully legal cannabis regime is a big deal. And immediately as that happens, the conversation starts over here. Sadiq Khan starts talking about it. Newspapers start talking about it. Imagine if the US goes fully legal at a federal level. If they just legalize the whole thing nationwide, you can imagine how we will react here. It's going to be
never going to happen. They're never going to do it here, Robert. They're never going to do it because they don't love us here. They hate us.
Stop it.
This is the point.
That's silly talk.
It's not silly talk. It's reality. We are 25 years behind every other country in the world, and every other country in the world is taking baby steps forward. We're not.
So Ollie, if
it's being said
I don't have the time you do.
Politicians to die out, and once the current generation have died out, the next generation will change it.
So that's 30 years.
I don't think it'll be.
I'm with Robert on this. I think Robert is correct because they always say when America sneezes, Britain catches a cold, and you look at everything that's come across from America, and eventually it's adapted here. One thing we pray is gun culture. We don't need that. Thank you. But everything else you think about, no win, no fee. When somebody said that to me about 10 years ago, about 15 years ago, I laughed at them. I said, you're mad. That'll never happen here. Boom. No win, no fee.
And you've got to factor in the pandemic as well. Post-COVID, all governments, not just the UK, but globally, they're going to need job creation and they're going to need tax revenue. And cannabis is a no-brainer. Look how many hundreds of thousands of jobs have now been created in the US and in Canada and other places where they have a full adult use market. You could do exactly the same here. You could probably create 50, 100,000 jobs overnight, I would have thought. and billions of pounds of tax revenue, which this government is really, really going to need in the next few years. So I'm more optimistic than Ollie.
It's not about the optimism. I think it's more of a mind game. So for years, I've been like, yeah, they're going to legalize, they're going to legalize, they're going to legalize. And they haven't. So I'm like, you know what? They're not going to do it. And hopefully if I say that, maybe they might. Do you know what I mean? Because every time I hope for something, it doesn't work. So I'm going to flip reverse
Ollie,
it on
I'm going to say
want
something.
You to legalize.
Phil,
keep it illegal.
Phil shone a spotlight on something. And there is a phrase that governs nearly everything we do in life. And it's so true. If you want to know the truth, follow the money. Just follow the money. And Phil made this point. Robert's point, I think, is absolutely spot on. And I think, you want to know what it's like? Follow the money trail. We are out of time. I've had a blast. I hope. And thank you to everybody new who's watched the show. Phil, a pleasure. Thank you. You're a very, very interesting chap. Really are. And I wish you well. We'll have you back. And to Robert, thank you very, very much for your expert opinion. Ollie, you see, didn't have notes, and it was a triumph. There we go.
Of course, but then a little bit
mental. We'll be
mental.
back same time next week, or with a fair wind in our sails, 6 o'clock on Men's Radio Station. I'm What's Left of Russ Kane. Until next week, stay safe.
Peace.